Hi everybody, I'm Zena Awesome, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my medical health, my medical issues, what led up to different procedures I've had done. If you've watched my channel for a while, you know that it was mainly focused on my husband's brain cancer, and now that he's passed, I need to figure out where I'm going with my channel, and I'm going to start with a bit of talking about me. I tried to do this on live streaming, but live streaming didn't work too well. At least they did unblock the first two attempts I did, because I was laying in bed with the dogs. After 4 minutes it got shut down. So anyway, so far I don't like it. Hi, I'm Zena Awesome, and I'm going to be talking about, partially about my weight, and then about my medical conditions as it all relates, and a little bit about Vandar, my husband who just died recently. So I've been fighting with my weight, or felt like I was fighting with my weight, since I was a teen. I wasn't super heavy, but I remember when I was in 7th grade, I asked my mom if I was fat, and she took me to the doctor, and the doctor said no, I wasn't fat, that I just had a bit of baby fat and that it would go away. And then when I was in junior high, I started drinking diet soda, like when Tab came out and RC100. That's when saccharin first kind of became available in sodas and stuff. And then when I was in high school, one year I actually worked in the cafeteria in the lunch line serving food, and although I was serving hamburgers and french fries, I would eat a chef's salad without any dressing for lunch every day, because I always felt that if I ate more than that I would get fat. And I didn't eat breakfast either. Even in basic training, one of the things they say is you have to, watch everybody there, and if people aren't eating, let everybody know and all that. And I would just explain at breakfast, because we also had to drink 2 glasses of water with every meal, because it was summertime. And so I would, for breakfast, just have my 2 glasses of water and no breakfast, no food. And pretty much had always been that way, where I skipped breakfast. I know now they say skipping meals, but I always felt if I ate breakfast it actually made me hungrier. And I think now that has to do with more carbs and the way insulin works and all that, but that's kind of beside the point. I always felt like I had a challenge with my weight, and I did really good for a while in the military when I didn't own a car and I had a bicycle, and I would bike at least 5-6 miles every day. Hey, quiet. 5-6 miles every day, because work was about 1.5 miles from the main part of base, and so I would bike there and then bike back for lunch, and then bike back after lunch, and then bike back. And then also during part of the time I had a bicycle, I was taking college classes, and they were about 3 miles from where I lived. So I did a lot of biking, and that kept my weight okay. But as soon as I bought a car, and then of course my weight started to go up. I was still fairly active. I did do horseback riding and things like that, but it didn't help enough. And it's like the first time I went on the weight control program. And when you go on it, you end up being on it for like a year, 2 years, because it's a whole system. And I had been on, in my 14 years in the Air Force, I'd been on the weight control program 3 times, managed to get off of it all 3 times, but it was very stressful, a very horrible process. I did all kinds of things you're never supposed to do to lose weight. The old sweat until you get it all out. I remember one time I went and donated blood, and really didn't drink anything after donating the blood, just to lose weight. I remember I walked out to my car, and when I got to my car, all I could do was like open the door and get in the car, and then I had to like put the seat back because I was about to pass out. So when I got out of the military in 1995, I decided that I'd done, all this dieting, all this yo-yo dieting and everything, that I wasn't going to worry about my weight. at least for a while. I mean, I knew eventually I'd need to worry about it, but because I had done so many bad things with dieting in the military, I just wasn't going to let it be a problem. Now, also, I slowly but surely, well, slowly, I jumped right up, kind of, you know, because in the military, I think my max weight was supposed to be 152, and I was more than that. I jumped up to almost 200 pretty fast, and kind of hovered around 200 for a long time. In 1999, my hubby got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I didn't really know a lot about diabetes back then, or what he needed to do, and I figured he would just follow doctor's instructions, and then he was really bad about telling me what the doctor was telling him. So that's when I started going with him to doctor's appointments, because I'd ask him questions and he'd go, I don't know. He had the same thing. He had some stuff with his eyes, just different things. He wouldn't be able to tell me anything. So I started going with him to the doctor. And we're veterans. We were both veterans. So this is all through the VA. And in the early 2000s, we decided we'd start trying to lose weight. His weight had crept up over the years too. And we went to what they called Move 1, and then we went to the thing they call Move 2. It's, you know, you go and they try to hit all the avenues. They talk about your food, and they talk about exercise and mental attitude, and they try to use all these techniques to help you lose weight. And even when we went to Move 2, we figured we would still try for a few more years before we seriously looked at gastric bypass, because even during the Move 2, they mentioned that gastric bypass was an option, and they had a speaker there for that. And at the time, we're like, not yet. So then finally in 2009, we decided that gastric bypass was the way we wanted to go. Our weights were definitely going up and up. Vandar was starting to push 300 pounds, and I was more, my highest weight I think was 230 pounds. And he still, 10 years later, still didn't have his diabetes under control. His normal blood sugar was around 250. And I could see the effects on his body, because when his blood sugar was high like that, you know, we had the farm, we were still fairly active, but when you get the little scrapes that you get just working on the farm, for him, they wouldn't heal. And I could see that, and he could see that. So he knew that it's something that we had to change. Well, you apply for the gastric bypass, and of course the VA is, in that sense, is just like any insurance. You have to go through the process. So we asked to do it. We started the process in 2009. They have you go to a psychologist, and they have you do all these different tests. You get ultrasounds and your heart checked out, and obviously a whole bunch of labs done. And that was the first time I ever did a 24-hour urine collection, and I was like, what? You know, when they say, oh, you got to do a urine sample, and they bring out this huge jug that's over half a gallon, and you're like, excuse me? And so we went through all that, and we qualified. Part of the criteria is you have to go to the support group even before you have surgery, and listen to people after they've had surgery and their problems. And you have to lose weight before the surgery. That's a requirement, because they want to see that you can successfully follow a weight loss program. So it sounds counterintuitive, but it's part of the process. And then when we got really close to scheduling time, we found out that a term I hadn't heard yet was A1C, which anybody who's diabetic knows that A1C is kind of like a way they look at, it's a blood test that gauges an average of your blood sugar over three months. So it's a really hard number to move. And Vandar's A1C was way off the chart. And they hadn't told us in all our briefings. They talked about smoking, like they wouldn't do gastric bypass if you were a smoker. You know, they had told us all the requirements, and they had never mentioned this A1C thing. So I was pissed. I was so upset. And I was able to schedule my surgery. But the idea with this was that it was going to be both of us or neither of us, because we wanted to have the same eating habits, the same lifestyle. And so what happened is I found out about the A1C. I dug into the research of diabetes and how it works and what causes blood sugar to go up. I tested him multiple times a day, which normally with type 2 you only test every day or every other day. But I would have him eat something, and then I would test him 30 minutes afterwards to see what it did to his blood sugar. And I came up with a plan that I told him was, you know, was only going to be temporary, because all we had to do was get his A1C under control, and then he'd have the surgery, and then we'd be doing the plan that comes with the surgery. And so I had him eating 200 calories every even hour, and anytime he ate a carb, it was combined with a protein or a fat, so that it would cause the carbs to go into his blood slower, so he didn't have the same spikes. And they were actually amazed that in just, it was like 3 months, I got his A1C down to a level where they would do surgery. At that meeting, when they said his A1C was so high, they told us it would take at least a year to get his A1C down, and if we were lucky, it would be 6 months. So they were just totally amazed that I was able to come up with a plan, and that my hubby was willing to follow it. But I made sure we worked with foods he liked and all that. And then years later, we came back around to the same plan to get his diabetes back under control. So in May, the first time I got scheduled, and my first gastric bypass got canceled the afternoon before it was supposed to happen, because it's elective surgery. If something more important comes in, they cancel it. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're kind of planning on your gastric bypass, you kind of do all your little binges, and you kind of go out to eat, and you kind of do all your little stuff, and then you get rid of a bunch of things, and you kind of mentally prepare, and then it didn't happen. So they scheduled me for a month later. Well, that actually happened to be only 7 days from Van Dar's surgery. Mine was still before his, but his was only 7 days after mine. And they asked me, oh, well, you can push it back further. And I said, no. I'm going to take it when you get it, give it to me, and I'll just deal with it. Gastric bypass surgery is pretty major surgery, even when they do it laparoscopically. They're really moving and cutting a lot of your guts, and the inflating your abdomen with air actually is part of what causes the pain. And apparently they also have to pull your liver back, so pulling the liver to the side is part of why that particular side hurts more after the surgery. But we got the surgery done. I lost weight very rapidly. I was down to 125 pounds in 9 months. I'm 5'6". I got a horse. I went horseback riding every day for a year. Van Dar did fairly well. He lost weight really fast, but he'd always been a strong guy. He had been a welder in the military, and he was used to really hefting things around the farm. And when his muscles got weak, it kind of scared him, because when you lose weight that fast, you do get weaker. I mean, you are literally starving your body. So it's not just fat that falls off. You do lose muscle too. But the idea is that you're going to build the muscle back. And he kind of got scared and started forcing himself to eat. So he stopped losing weight sooner, and then kind of regained some of the weight. But he didn't regain it all, and his diabetes stayed gone, at least for a few years. And then so I said, okay, so that's the weight loss stuff. Now what happened for me is in 2012, November of 2012, actually I think it was technically it was Halloween. It was October 31st. And the problem happened, but the surgery didn't technically happen until the next day. I started feeling really sick around 6 p.m. Now, I was still having a lot of problems with food intolerances or things making me sick and having to take it easy when I was eating. And I had just had some really delicious lamb. And so, you know, we were laughing that the lamb had kicked my butt. And the pain just got worse and worse and worse. And then finally, I was in just so much pain. I was still in I had already put my nightgown on for going to bed that night. And I got up out of bed and walked past Vandar and said, "Take me to the hospital." In my nightgown, I just walk out to the car. There was stuff in the back seat. I didn't care. I climbed in the back seat of the car, curled up in a little ball, and just waited. And then he's asking me, you know, where do you think we should go? And I'm kind of like, we decided to go to the VA since we were veterans. Even though we would pass another hospital on the way, we figured it was best to go to where we knew, I'm going to say our insurance was covered. He had to stop for gas on the way. And I was in so much pain by that point, and this is now about 9 o'clock at night, that I was dry heaving. I'd already at home threw up anything that I had to throw up, and now I was just dry heaving and dry heaving and dry heaving. And we got to the emergency room, and there's no parking up next to the emergency room. It's all handicapped, so he had to drop me off at the doors and then drive down to the area where he could park and then come back up. So I got out of the car, again, in my nightgown, and went through the emergency room doors and then just laid down on the floor and curled up in a ball. And they come up and go, "You can't do that." And I'm like, I'm doing it. And they're like, well, we'll get you a chair. We'll get you a wheelchair. So they come back with a wheelchair, and I do get up and get in the wheelchair, but then they go to do something, and I was in so much pain, I couldn't sit in a wheelchair. So I'm back down on the floor again. And then probably about then, I don't know, Vandar came in. I was, you know, they talk about the pain scale 1 to 10. I was in a 10 a lot of the time. And they wouldn't give me any pain meds because they weren't sure what was wrong. So they promised they were taking me to a bed. They put me in a bed. And the only way I felt any relief at all was hyperventilating and being curled up in a ball. And they're telling me not to hyperventilate, and of course in my mind I'm going, tough shit, give me drugs and I won't hyperventilate, because it was the only thing that was helping. And yeah, maybe it was making me dizzy, I don't know. I just remember that it was the only thing that helped. And I remember screaming and hollering a lot because I'd be in there alone and I'd be wanting pain meds, and I was hollering for pain meds. And finally, you know, I was out of it for a lot of it. They got a surgeon in probably around 2 a.m. But they're trying to prep me for surgery. And the problem was they brought me a bowl to throw up in. But a few hours before surgery, I had been dry heaving so much. I also I started refusing to answer their questions, because once you get the same questions, you know, 20 times and you're in so much pain, I stopped. I said, go talk to my husband. And I wouldn't answer questions anymore about when I started feeling sick or what was going on. But I had dry heaved so much that I got what they call a Weiss tear. I ripped my esophagus and I started throwing up blood. And if I stayed curled up in a ball on my side, because it reduced the pain, it helped. But because they were prepping me for surgery, they kept coming and having me roll over on my back so they could do EKG, so they could do chest x-rays, so they could try to put a central line in my neck. And whenever they'd put me on my back, then I'd have to throw up. And of course, every time they came up to do these things, they would take the little thing for me to throw up and they would put it down by my feet. So I actually remember that just before they took me off to the operating room, I threw up over the edge of the bed on the floor and saw the blood just splatter all across the floor, and then them push the bed through the blood and see the wheel tracks in blood down the hallway as they took me off to the operating room. Well, at that point, I had dead intestines. My intestines had become tangled, so strangulation had occurred, and I had intestinal death. I have the scar. You can see here that it goes all the way up to my ribs, and down here they went around my belly button. But they cut me from here to here, and they took out what they knew was dead that night, and they put me in a coma because they also like disconnected all my intestines, and they didn't want anything moving. That's enough. Hey. And so they put me in a coma. They left everything disconnected, and then the next day, like 24 hours later, they did a second surgery. And during the second surgery, they removed the remaining necrotic tissue, and they hooked everything back up. And they didn't even close me. They used one of those reverse vacuum things so you heal from the inside out. But I was in a coma for about 9 days. It's really weird. If anybody's, well, at least for me, when I was in a coma, I was aware of a lot of things. So that was really strange. Sounds like a helicopter. So, then they tried to talk me into going home with this open thing and taking a reverse pump thing home with me so it would heal that way. And I said, no, I live on a farm. You need to close it. So day 12 in the hospital, I went back into surgery for them to close me up. And after the surgery, I was so weak. I couldn't even sit up for more than 5 minutes. I had someone lunging my horses, and I went outside to watch her lunge my horses. And I brought a blanket with me, and I thought I could just sit there and watch, and then I just like drooped and drooped and drooped, and then I was laying down on the porch on the concrete, and I had to go in. I couldn't even sit and watch her lunge my horses. So the problem I had is that whenever I ate, it all passed straight through me. I was eating 3,000 calories a day and losing weight. Again, the surgery was in November, and by March, when I went in for surgery, I was about 127. By March, I was 95 pounds. So they decided to go ahead and start me on IV nutrition. You really think you can play on Mama's lap? I was on IV nutrition, to start IV nutrition, it's called EPN. No! Off. Off. No, go play. So, to start TPN, they want to start it in the hospital because since it has all the nutrition in it, which means it has carbs, proteins, and fats, they like to... Enough! Go play! They like to... No, go play. They like to start it off with just one of them and then add the other and then add the third and make sure you don't have problems. And so I ended up spending 5 days in the hospital just to start the TPN. And to administer TPN, you have to have what they call a PICC, which is basically a peripheral central line. Central line means it goes to like your heart, or your heart blood vessels, because they're big enough and have enough blood that they can handle the introduction of something like food product. Some chemos are that way because the chemos will burn out your veins if you do them right into a vein. So it has to be something big. But the problem with a PICC is it actually gives bacteria and infection an access to your blood all the time. So you have to be really careful with it. So I was on IV nutrition for 11 months. And yes, so every night I would hook up to a big bag of white fluid. I had to put vitamins in it on a certain schedule, and you have to keep it refrigerated, but to use it, it needs to be room temperature. So it's one of those things, you keep it refrigerated, but the one you're going to use that day you take out and set up. And I would do mine at night, and that worked fine. So I did have a backpack I could carry it around. I even went on a cruise with my TPN. Got the Sharps container and a refrigerator and all the things I needed to make it work. So I slowly but surely gained weight. I was eating while I was on TPN. Some people are on TPN because they can't eat. I was on TPN because I couldn't absorb. So after 11 months, I got up to about 135 pounds, and they went ahead and took me off. And that would have been, let's see. So that would be, so they started it in March of 2013. They stopped it in February of 2014. In November of 2013, my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she lives in Las Vegas. I live in Southern California. So I had visited her a few times, but once I was off the TPN, I was able to go up there and live with her, and she passed away on 7/7/14. So I was her caregiver, and I was with her when she passed away. The good thing about that for me was that once I came off the TPN, I was still working on regaining my strength, and taking care of her was a lot less work than being on the farm. So during the time, kind of in between stuff, I developed what they call SVT, supraventricular tachycardia, where for no good reason whatsoever, my heart rate would just jump to 220 beats a minute, and then maybe a half hour later just go back to normal. And that started while I was on the TPN and continued while I was at my mom's place in Vegas. And so they did, through the VA system, they did want me to go to the emergency room up there, and I did see a cardiologist. But ironically, the most local place to have the heart ablation, which is what I needed, was actually Loma Linda VA, which was my normal VA. And so my procedure ended up not happening until after my mom passed. So I was able to just re-enroll in the Loma Linda system and get the heart ablation. What a heart ablation is that there's basically two different types of heart problems. There's plumbing problems, and then there's electrical problems. And mine was an electrical problem. There was some type of feedback loop that caused my heart to beat ridiculously high. And so the idea is, just like with an electrical problem, that you cut the wire that's giving the feedback. So they use cold to freeze a few cells of your heart to prevent that feedback from happening. And I had that in 2014, the same year my mom died. And I've been pretty good since. The only time I've seen a few unexpected spikes in my pulse was after my 2018 hospital stay, but I'll get to that. So even though I was off the TPN, I was still getting iron infusions, and there's different types of iron and different ways they can infuse it. And I had one doctor do it one way and then another doctor do it another way, because I got infusions for several years. So actually the first time we went to the infusion clinic for Vandar to get his chemo, the nurses thought I was there for treatment, not that he was there for treatment. So I already knew a lot of the nurses and everything, and already was comfortable with the infusion clinic, which was kind of nice, an upside anyway. So in 2015, this I'm guessing a little bit because I didn't have the exact dates written down. I spent 5 days in the hospital for what's called a small bowel obstruction. That's technically what I was in for with the major surgery. But I'd been having problems. It was probably already my second, but the first time I didn't go to the doctor right away. So this time I woke up in the middle of the night. I could feel this problem. I wanted to get it documented, because you know what's not documented they can't treat, they can't follow, they can't tell you what's wrong. And actually Vandar had a background acting job coming up that morning. So this was like 2 in the morning, and I said, you know, honey, I'm just going to go ahead, hit the emergency room. It probably won't be that busy. Get in, get out. I said, you've got your job tomorrow. I'll let you know what's going on. Well, I really wasn't quite prepared, because I really didn't think it was anything that major. But they admitted me. Apparently, and this I now know, is that the only treatment for a small bowel obstruction is to basically stop you from eating and drinking, put you on IV fluids. If they need to relieve pressure in your stomach, they can put in a nasal tube to help drain your stomach, and then they wait and see. And about 30% of the time, you're going to need surgery to correct the problem. So they put me, like, I didn't even realize it was that major, because, you know, it was getting later in the morning. It was like 6 in the morning by now. And one of the nurses says, oh, would you like some pain meds? And I'm like, sure, why not? And so then I realized they actually gave me like something similar to morphine, and I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. I says, when am I going to be able to drive after this? I says, you know, I have to drive home. And I think at that point they'd already, you know, done the surgical consult or put a surgical consult in, because you're followed by surgery. That's the problem, is they don't know if you're going to need surgery or not. So I had no idea I was going to be staying, so I didn't bring clothes. I didn't have anything with me. And then because of the animals and Vandar working and the distance between our home and the hospital, he really wasn't able to visit me on that stay. So that was 2015. And then in May of 2016, that's when Vandar had his aphasia incident. Aphasia is when you're not saying the right words. And he just had a phone call with a business associate. I still, being somewhat sick, still was in the room laying down. I would lay down to eat, and I still a lot of times prefer to lay down and eat, but I'm getting better. He comes in and is telling me about this call, and I'm not understanding what he's saying, because he's getting about every 4th or 5th word wrong, but he doesn't seem to know it. So I get up, I follow him out, and he's getting kind of pissed with me because he doesn't really know why I'm not able to understand him. To him, he's speaking absolutely clear. So I do the stroke test of the hands and have him smile, and I don't see anything that looked stroke related. But he continues to have problems, so I said, well, we got to go to the emergency room. And my husband knew that if I said we needed to go to the emergency room, that, I didn't, kid around about that type of stuff. So he still doesn't quite understand. And then even as we're driving and we're talking, he's still just not quite getting the words right. And the problem is they weren't totally off. They were just sort of off that made things confusing. And we got to the emergency room, and they admitted him. At that point, he wasn't even able to sign his name. So they keep him in the hospital for, I believe, 3 days. They don't know what's wrong. They don't find anything wrong. And so basically, they just say, come back and get another MRI in X number of weeks. So we do. And then, of course, when the tumor shows up, then he gets scheduled for surgery. And the VA hospital we go to does not do brain surgery. So we had to go to West LA VA. And then that's when we found out that the different VA hospitals don't talk to each other. They can't even fill prescriptions from each other because they wanted him to take this antibiotic. And I was at the VA Loma Linda, and I'm like, well, can I pick it up here? And they're like, no. So they actually had to express mail it to us so that he could have it, because we were getting close to the deadline of when his surgery was, and he had to take it so many days before the surgery. So he had his first brain surgery in October of 2016. And technically speaking, when they do the pathology of the tumor, that's your diagnosis date. So even though he actually had symptoms that presented in May, he wasn't technically considered diagnosed until October of 2016, that he had the glioblastoma, which is stage 4 brain cancer. Now, I'm not going to go into that a lot, but I do want to point out that between the October 2016 and when he passed away on 2/2/2020, he had 5 brain surgeries. He had 2 rounds of radiation treatment, one that lasted 6 weeks and one that lasted 2 weeks. He tried 4 different chemotherapy treatments. He used the tumor treatment field pretty much all the time that we could use it, which means you can't use it right after surgery and you can't use it during radiation. And even with all the stuff, all the treatments and everything he was doing, and he also had 3 hospital stays. And then, that weren't surgery related. We also had 2 weeks in a rehab hospital. We still managed to get 5 cruises in. We still went camping multiple times. We got to go to Comic-Con. We got a lot of traveling in. We got a lot of stuff done. So, really thankful for that. During that time, in October, in October of 2018, he had just been in the hospital in May of 2018. So it was the same unit. I was in the hospital for 5 days. I was having problems eating, and even though I was making sure I was drinking 64 ounces of fluid every day, I still got dehydrated. And now I know if you ever get severely dehydrated and you go into the hospital to be rehydrated, then you're going to be in the hospital for a few days, because once they add more fluids to your blood, now your blood is all out of whack, because it's all a mixture of the different chemicals. And even though they try to balance everything out, it's a catch-up game once they add a lot of fluids if you're low on them, which just sucks because I learned that the hard way too. So I was in the hospital for 5 days, basically got diagnosed with an ulcer, a margin ulcer, which comes back to my gastric bypass surgery. What that means is it's the ulcer is, which ulcer, of course, just means sore, okay? The sore is on the joint, the suture area between my stomach and the intestines. So it's where they sewed them together. So this is probably going to be a lifelong thing that will be treated, because it's not something that just goes away on its own. And I also had kidney stones. So I didn't have anything else majorly wrong. But they were checking different things, and I was only in for 5 days. So I was taking care of Vandar. They made sure that I had a private room so that I could take care of Vandar while he was with me, because they knew that he needed care. And then I also had my dogs in the van out in the parking lot. They were in a shaded area, so they did not get too hot, and I would go out at least twice a day, usually 3 times a day, to walk them, water them, and feed them. All right. So that kind of pointed out that I still have to take care of myself. And so I went back on, I started using my Creon more, which is a digestive enzyme, helps digest carbs, proteins, and fats. And then I'm on PPI, which is proton pump inhibitor. It reduces the amount of acid I produce in my stomach to help keep the ulcer from happening. Well, now that Vandar has passed, I did go do my most recent GI appointment just in February, and they've recommended that I try the low FODMAP diet, and it is very complicated, and it basically cuts out everything that people might find irritable to their bowels. They kind of figure, and then of course when I had the surgery in 2012, I lost a piece of my ileum, and apparently it's not a very big piece, but there's an area of your ileum that's pretty important. That's the third part of your small intestines. And with the gastric bypass surgery, I'm already bypassing the first part of my intestines. So I have the symptoms of short bowel syndrome, even though my bowels aren't as short as they usually say they need to be to have short bowel syndrome. And then because I seem to also be affected by stress, they're thinking I may also have irritable bowel syndrome. And then I also have, which is now totally under control, ulcerative colitis, which is an autoimmune. So I have a lot of stuff going on in there. And the low FODMAP diet is specifically dealing with carbs. I also have problems with fats and proteins. I pretty much have to marinate my proteins, which changes their molecular structure, or they upset my stomach. And I am learning that unfortunately if I eat too much fat, that also upsets my stomach. And then I'm adding to that the low FODMAP diet, which is dealing with carbs. Part of it is the simple to explain part is that you cut out gluten, you cut out all gluten, you cut out all dairy except for hard cheeses, you cut out anything with any amount of onion or garlic. I think that's the absolute hardest. And then half the fruit are excluded, and about half the veggies are excluded. So it's not just one thing. And then any sweetener ending in "all" is excluded, as is high fructose corn syrup, And it gets so complex that firm tofu is okay, but silky tofu isn't okay. Red bell peppers are okay, but green bell peppers are not okay. And then the other part is quantity. So even when they say it's okay, it doesn't mean you can eat a bunch of it. For example, blueberries. They consider a serving of blueberries 20 blueberries. 20 blueberries? Really? You know, normally when I eat blueberries, I eat about half of a pack. You know, they're usually like little 4 or 6 ounce packs, and I usually eat about half of them. And then later in the day, eat the other half, because, you know, blueberries go bad pretty fast. Same thing as you're allowed to have certain nuts. You cannot have pistachios, but you can have other nuts. But the thing is, it'll say things like 10 almonds is a serving. And if you go over 10 almonds, then the amount of chemicals that you're putting in the diet can affect everything. And the idea with this is that you eliminate everything until you stop having problems. And then you add one thing back in, and you do it for like 3 days, and you see if you're having issues. And eventually you start adding stuff back in, because the full low FODMAP diet is, you can't really make it nutritionally balanced. It has way too many limitations in it. But the idea is that you don't need to eliminate everything. You just start with everything. And according to my doctor, he said they've had about a 60% success rate with it. Well, I've been sort of trying to follow it and been testing things for about 2 or 3 weeks now. And I'm very encouraged, because I find that it really does help. But the things that affect me are so bizarre that you wouldn't expect, and some of the stuff you really have to read the labels on. So, for example, I had bought some kettle corn microwave popcorn, and I didn't read the label, and it had an all in it, I think sorbitol, and it was fine. It didn't upset my stomach. See, I have 2 different issues. I have things that upset my stomach, and then I have things that make me have to go to the bathroom. Well, that made me have to go to the bathroom all night. So, not good. So, it is helping, because it's starting to help me see what's a problem. And I thought I had a milk problem, but I've been dabbling a little with milk, which may be a little too much, but I think I can have a little milk. But I'm going to say gluten at this point seems to be a problem. And I had ordered some gluten-free cereal, but unfortunately chickpeas are high FODMAP, so you can't have those on your diet, and some gluten-free foods use chickpeas. So you can't have beans, you can't have chickpeas, you can't, beans. I don't mean green beans, I mean black beans and pinto beans and all those things. So, yeah, planning on, I want to get into the FODMAP side of things a lot more, and I want to make videos about my FODMAP diet, but I wanted to give all the background about why, because basically I've had chronic diarrhea since 2012. It has gotten better, because for about a year, I don't know, I'd go 10, 12 times a day, and now it's more like 3 to 6 times a day. And I do occasionally have accidents, so it is a major thing. But the low FODMAP does seem to be helping with me figuring stuff out. The problem is, sometimes I make something that I think is safe and it kicks my ass, And if it was something that I put several ingredients into, I don't know which ingredient caused the problem. An example would be that I made some rice with cinnamon, pumpkin seasoning, and cranberries, and I couldn't eat it. I ended up giving it to the dogs. So I don't know if the cranberries were a problem. I'm starting to wonder now if I have a problem with cinnamon, because I know that cinnamon doesn't sit with me like it used to. That a lot of times I just feel like avoiding cinnamon. My hubby loved cinnamon, so I would put cinnamon in a lot of his stuff, and I just found that cinnamon would kind of turn me off. Like if my coffee had a cinnamon flavor, that it just wasn't as appealing. So I'm thinking I might have a problem with cinnamon. But the cutting out the garlic and the onion, and this means like garlic powder and onion powder, and seasoned salt. That's why I was so surprised when I ate the deviled egg that it tasted good, because all it had was salt, pepper, and mayonnaise in it. Nothing extra to really give it flavoring, but it tasted good. So, a lot of people are having the challenge of the low FODMAP diet, so maybe that's something that some people will find interesting. I just wanted to go into more details about my health problems. I'm going to go over a quick list to make sure I touched on everything. So, I have short bowel syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis. I also have osteoporosis. My T-score was minus 3.9 in my hip. That means I'm 16 times more likely to break my bone when I fall down than a normal person. And again, a lot of times they do that in percentages. So if you was to convert that to percentage, means 1,600. You know, because you'd add 2 zeros to it. I'm 1,600% more likely to break a bone if I fall down. So I really have to be careful about that. I'm going to be getting a DEXA scan. Again, I get the shots. I get the shots twice a year, and I can't take the pills because of my digestive issues. If you have any digestive issues, the pills don't work. So I get the twice a year shots, and with the shots, you have to be sure that you're there. They pretty much want you there like almost exactly to the day for every 6 months. Because if you go too long in between shots, they've shown that there's an increased chance of fractures. So in back fractures. I don't want any back fractures. So I'll be getting my DEXA scan. My last DEXA scan was February 2019, and then I started the treatments. So this is going to be my 1 year point of having had the treatments. So hopefully we'll see it move in the right direction. I hope so, because it does kind of scare me that basically it means 40% of the volume of my bone is gone. Oh, I'm exaggerating. 39% of the volume of my bone is gone. That's kind of scary to me. So then I mentioned the SVT. I've had kidney stones. I have the margin ulcer. I have reactive hypoglycemia. This again is post-gastric bypass. What it means is sometimes when I eat something, my blood sugar goes really high, and then I overproduce insulin and my blood sugar goes really low. And unlike a diabetic, who's usually it goes low because of drugs, the drugs being wrong. This is just a natural thing that happens. Has nothing to do with me taking any drugs, but I do have a glucose meter, and on the glucose meter I have seen my blood sugar as low as 35, and I've had it in the 30s on more than one occasion. And then there's rules I have to follow about eating something, and then I have to be sure I eat something with carbs, and then I have to be sure I eat something with proteins, and there's like this whole thing I have to do because I don't want my blood sugar to go back up and then drop back down. So I have to eat something, make sure I've gotten it high enough, and then I have to eat something to stabilize it. So I have to do, once I hit that, I have to do multiple blood tests at certain times and eat certain foods to make sure that my blood sugar is stable. And when this type of thing happens, is it tends to happen when I'm more active. One of the things I didn't mention is that about 6 months, maybe 9 months ago now, I started taking anti-nausea medicine. It's actually for people who are getting chemotherapy to help prevent nausea for those people. And it has really helped. I've been able to eat more. I've gained like 5 pounds in the last 6 months, which is great. So that's really good. So I've gained weight. But one of my problems had always been that when I'm more active, because of bowel movement problems and nausea problems, that if I'm active, I don't want to eat. Because, active. By active, I mean driving or going and doing things. So when I say active, I'm not necessarily talking about, playing basketball or something. I'm talking about I'm going out of the house and going shopping. Because you much rather have a bowel movement accident at home than in a store or something. Or you don't want to feel so sick that you can't go and enjoy what you're doing. And so a lot of times I would not eat, because if I don't eat, I don't have problems. Of course, you can't do that all the time. But if I am more active, of course, I'm burning more calories. So then what tends to happen is then when I do eat, I eat more, and then that causes the problem with my blood sugar. So I remember one of the times when I was with Van Dar, and we were at the Keslow Dunes, and I don't know what I'd eaten that morning. I don't think I'd done anything, but I might have had coffee. I'm not sure. But I was out hiking on the dunes, and I could feel that my blood sugar was dropping. I've had it happen enough times now that I usually know what it is. And I was going up to strangers and literally asking for some food, because if I didn't do that, I was afraid I might just, literally pass out up a big sand dune where there's really nothing. There's nothing at Keslow Dunes, so it's not like a really big national park or something. It's just sand dunes here in California. But I was able to get some food, so I have had at least one. That was kind of scary. So then I worked a little harder at making sure that didn't happen. And of course, the easiest way to keep that from happening is not eating, which of course isn't great. So now that I'm not having to take care of Van Dar, I'm trying to figure these things out, and I'm hoping that this low FODMAP diet will also help address these concerns, because if I better digest what I'm eating, then I'm going to get the calories, and I'm going to be able to, my body's going to be able to properly manage the food, and hopefully the hormones will be right. And then the final major problem I have is the small bowel obstructions. As once you've had multiple surgeries, well, some people more than others, you get what's called adhesions. Adhesions are scar tissue that's inside. And unlike scar tissue on the outside of your body that just can make a little lump, scar tissue inside your body can grow in all kinds of different ways. It can grow in ribbons or in strings, and it can change shapes, and it can pull things together and pull things apart and constrict around things. So adhesions inside the body are one of the main problems with obstructions. So I just had an obstruction probably this weekend, and I didn't go to the emergency room, which technically I probably should have. And then also while Van Dar was in his hospice care, I had 2 obstructions. And then other than that, I've probably had 6 or 7 since the 2015 hospital stay. And technically speaking, you're supposed to go in to the emergency room for that. But I'm 2 hours away from the emergency room, and I wouldn't go to the emergency room here. The last time we did that, we got billed, and I can't afford to get billed, so I wouldn't do that unless it's an ambulance that comes and takes me. I'm worried about what I can do with my dogs. So, I don't know what's going to happen with that. Generally, obstructions or problems with obstructions don't get better, they just get worse as things tend to shift and move and the scar tissue constricts more and more. So each time you have an obstruction, there's like a 30% chance you'll need surgery, and if you don't get surgery and need it, you die. So it's really not, that's why they treat it so seriously. So that is a major issue, and like I said, hopefully diet will help with that, but I don't know that anything. Some things say that if you eat less fiber you'll have less obstructions, but other things say that that's not true. So I've done a lot of research on that, and I'm not finding any good guidance there. So the least I can do is to try to feel better. It's probably TMI for some of you, but I just wanted you to know more about me and know my health problems, because I just would vaguely touch on them while I was taking care of Vandar, and they actually are probably more major than I kind of like to think about. And actually, I was just thinking, maybe my next primary care appointment, I could do the tele visit, but I just realized doing this video that I'm not going to be able to do that, because my next appointment is the end of April, and my last appointment, he said that it sounded like I have a very minor heart murmur, but he'd want to check it out next time I come in. So I can't obviously do that over the computer, so I definitely need to go in and see my doctor. So thank you for listening. I hope I wasn't too scary, and I'm willing to answer whatever questions you have about these health issues or go into more detail on any of it. So thank you very much. I hope this is useful to somebody, and it's worth it even if it's only useful to one person. I don't have a problem talking about my health issues. So thank you very much, and have a great day.